Good morning, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sable. It is so exciting to be here as a part of Writers Conduit, and especially to participate in believable world building.
If some of this is a little, if you guys have questions or I'm going too fast, please let me know. I tend to talk very quickly.
What made you want to write for kids? Just as kind of an icebreaker.
So today what we're going to be covering is we're going to be talking about who can critique and kind of what are the different types of critiquers who are in the world around us.
So, for example, this is Pelagia, homeworld of the Sky Rays.
I've been doing creative writing workshops here where I live for a long time. It's always been this kind of format where you set a timer, write whatever based on the prompt, and then go around open mic and just kind of read what we wrote.
So we're talking about cover art today. Cover art can attract readers or repel them. As much as we like to think people won't judge a book by its cover, we know it's true.
As far as I can tell, the best definition of what neurodiversity is any form of differentiation in brain function.
We are here to discuss NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month.
This is the traditional versus independent publishing panel.
I'm really into the academic side of mythology as well as the more fun storytelling side.
When you hit somebody, it makes a distinct sound. If you hit them in a certain place, it makes a distinct sound.
Welcome to Writers Conduit, finding your online community.
And hello. Hello, everybody. How are you doing this fine time zone, otherwise known as morning for myself, morning for Rund, and the afternoon for Lukasz?
That's right. Hi.
Hi.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I am definitely not putting on a facade and pretending to be a morning person. That would be totally not in my mannerisms.
I have coffee. If I want to say, yeah, there we go. Cheers. Skål. For those of you who it is morning, thank you so much for being here. For everybody else, thank you so much for being here. My name is Sapha Burnell, and this is to what you perceive as, beside me, Rund writer, and beside him, Lukasz Drobnik, the author of Vostok, Nocturne, and amazing flash fiction. So we are all very excited to be doing this panel on artificial intelligence and speculations on tech today with you all. What we're going to do is we are going to make sure that we hit the right button. We're dealing with an intro and definitions, so we're going to tell you who we are and why we're talking about AI in the first place. We're going to have a discussion on AI, God, servant, or symbiont. And then, as a practical application, we figured we'd spend a few minutes talking about the recent events with LaMDA. LaMDA being Google's bot that some employees of Google have come forward and said is sentient. So, who are we and why are we talking about artificial
This
intelligence.
link is to Drobnik.
Thank you,
So that
Lou.
you can see his amazing shorts, which are really awesome.
They're a lot of fun. And if you've been part of my streams at all, you know that I legitimately have Lukasz's book sitting right here in my setup. And that is the novel. That is Vostok. At first, hi, my name is Sapha Burnell. I am the author of 4 books, editor of many, and I view the creation of artificial sapient intelligence, important distinction, from the lens of ethical creation and faith. Building compassionate systems with less programmed bias, which want to see us grow, and as we foster them as new creations. It doesn't take much searching to find the doomsday alternative. I'd rather Lieben, shout out to my book Neon Lieben, than Skynet. For the love of everything, I would rather Lieben than Skynet. And my main cyberpunk book, Neon Lieben, is AI meets gene splicers when artificially intelligent android Lieben escapes the conglomerate which made her. Will Lieben help the anarchists who freed her, or will she hinder them? Neon Lieben is out everywhere, and this is the reason why we're talking about AI today. Why I put forth the panel in the first place. A little quote from Neon Lieben. Neons stopped as he entered patient wards. Android senses riled and scanned while metal and silicone bodies became statues dedicated to the new humanity loved and conquered. A world of the modern machine's design. That's just a little slip in from chapter 1 of Neon Lieben about one way that androids can come into our society, love and conquer us. Next up, we have the mighty Lukasz Drobnik. Hello, how are you?
Good.
Good. So you prepared a little statement about AI. Would you like me to read it, or do you want to read it yourself?
I think I can read it. Just,
all right.
Give me a sec.
How's everybody in the chat?
Okay.
How are you doing? Emily, hello. Good morning. And hello, Daz.
I need to find it. Sorry, just.
Yeah, no worries. Tara.
I can't see the whole thing.
Oh, here. I will. I will move it up for you. Just a second.
Thank you.
This is. Doop doop. There we go.
Okay, so I've recently read an interesting article about AI in science fiction. And this is that article by Isabella Herrmann. She's a scientist from Berlin. And in this article, she reminds us that science fiction is not a scientific assessment in the strict sense, but tells dramas for a human audience. So when we take sci-fi too literally, it can distort our image of AI's current potential, and it can distract us from the real-world consequences and risks. And it's not to say that we shouldn't ask, the big questions about AI, as saying becoming self-aware or autonomous, but we shouldn't lose sight from the here and now of AI and how it shapes our present world.
Wonderful. And thank you for the follow, Story Girl. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think this question of, asking the big questions of self-awareness and autonomy is going to be interesting, looking at it from a literary standpoint, looking at it from the standpoint of people who are writers. Because if you're watching this, the likelihood is you yourself are a writer or an author of fiction. So I think it's good to have these conversations. At the same time, we have to remind us that science fiction in and of itself is not scientific fact. So I like that. It's a very intriguing in. And then this is Vostok. Story Girl has been looking forward to this panel. I'm so glad. Yay! So this is part of the cover of Vostok.
We've been looking forward to seeing you too.
Yes. Thank you for being here. She says as she's about to sip coffee in a few minutes. So, Poznan, Poland, the middle of a harsh winter. Veronica is in love with her best friend who has just told her about his new boyfriend. They spend most evenings drinking away their problems with a bunch of like-minded pub-goers. There's been a terrorist attack. A girl gets murdered with a war scythe. The reality reveals a whole new layer when the friends mention a place called Vostok City. Uh-oh. I woke up after 5 hours of sleep for this. No regrets. Yes! Wonderful! Ah! So that is Vostok. Vostok is a fantastic... Gosh, it's literary fiction. It's science fiction. It's cyber thriller. It's espionage. It is poetic, and it is absolutely dreamlike. I love Vostok, and it was such a joy to be able to have the privilege of working on it. So that is Vostok. And here's just a quick quote, and I know this one's a bit small. Can you read it, Lukasz?
I think I can, yeah.
Wonderful. Yes, a war scythe sounds like a rough way to go.
Yeah. So this one is not from Vostok, because all the AI-related things could be too spoilery. It's actually from flash fiction, speculative flash fiction, which also deals with the issue of AI. Here we go. The buzzard does a figure of 8 against the cruel blue sky. The cloaking devices don't let it track us. It still has its full camera eyes, movement detectors, who knows how many, and an automatic gun. It seems to have a mind of its own, and I can't shake the impression it knows all too well we have to come back for our boy. I can call it the buzzard only inside my head. Perhaps you called it something else, or maybe, after all those years together, we both came up with the same name, inspired by its looming presence, the silent buzzing sound it produces, and the way it makes us feel like rodents in the fields. Finally, the buzzard flies away. We wait a few tense seconds and dash towards a thicket of spruces.
And that is from Nameless by Lukasz Drobnik. And you gave us a link to Nameless, I believe. So if that can go up, that would be great. That was with Akashic Books. So I'm very excited too, because all three of us have different views on AI, and it's going to be amazing. I'm so excited, everybody. And if you do have questions, everybody, let us know. I'm going to compile the questions, and then we'll go to them one at a time. So do let us know. And when you're writing a question, please just put like big capital letters, question, colon, and then your question, just so that we see it in the chat. All right. And next we have the illustrious Rund.
Hello. Well, that was a brilliant start, wasn't it, chat? Hello, everyone. My name is Rund Writer. I am a virtual tuber, as you can see, and I write, at the moment, segments of my story to be on Twitch and then narrate them on YouTube. This is kind of a breakdown of some of my thoughts for AI, and it's, when one plays God, it's important not to make one. I want readers to see a world whereby chaining AI with our limitations, there can be a world with both of us in it. The amorality of creating a species that exists to serve you so that people can experience and think for themselves on the amorality of creating a species that exists to serve you, to clash with the AI's peace and joy in fulfilling the role. One second. A question from chat.
We do have a question from chat.
Do you think something like Jarvis from MCU, along with the interface, is possible?
Now, Leah, when you say along with the interface, do you mean the interface which becomes Vision, or do you mean the interface which was inside of Iron Man's suit? Because that's a very important distinction. Do I think that some form of overarching AI or his office, is possible in some form of cloud that could kind of go between devices? Absolutely, I think that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. In fact, the interface is just a matter of utility. The core program. The real question is, do you think something like Jarvis is possible? Which I'm assuming we all do, since we're talking about AI. And the interface is just giving the artificial sapience means to move about.
What do you think, Lukasz?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm equipped when it comes to the scientific knowledge to actually seriously tackle such questions. I try to view the AI mostly as a storyteller. So I try to focus it on it as a storytelling device. It's actually, that article I mentioned earlier just touches upon a bit. I think it's more responsible for me to not go outside my expertise, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. So as a storyteller, when we look at the story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, when we look at the story of this program which Tony Stark invented to help him do things, that basically an electronic butler, let's be honest. And then through the course of the movies, we see this program become a sapient being in its own right. Kind of what merit do you see? Do you see, like, what do you think about just that kind of that progression, if you will?
Well, it's definitely a sci-fi trope that's present in the literature. I've recently finished a really, really great book about a novel by Louisa Hall called Speak. It's from 2015. It has a similar premise, because there's basically what's supposed to be a chatbot evolved into a self-aware being. I definitely see it as a thing in the literature that can convey many things about our world, etc. It's hard for me, without the computer science knowledge, to decide if it's really possible. But yeah, I think we should be very cautious when creating things that can absorb lots of data and then assembling them together. Because we are not really aware how our own brains work. So
you touched
anywhere, but
you touched on something we're going to talk about later too, about how do we define intelligence. We don't even know how human intelligence works. How is it that we can define artificial intelligence through some markers in ourselves? And I think that when we are looking at something like, and there's a bit of augmented reality versus virtual reality. And I think, in augmented reality, putting on a pair of glasses that gives you some form of, like, you see it in narratives all the time, this sort of feel like, I have put these on and now I can see certain hologram-like things in my environment. Those types of technology have been experimented with and are being experimented with right now. But then the question for us is, how do we see what's happening right now? And then both theorize and create an opinion on it that we can then use in story. And then what story are we telling? Memristors are a computational substrate that can persist state without power. Yeah. There's a lot that... Oh, hello, Talon. Conduit's going well for you too. I have raised Lucas's volume. I can absolutely. Let me just click on Lukasz here.
Okay.
There we go. Can I have a sound check on Lukasz?
Hello, hello, hello.
Well, well, thank you for tuning in,
Going?
Artho. We are happy to have you.
All right, I hope that's better. That is the max volume I can get from Lukasz, so hopefully on the soundboard it is better for everyone. All right, let's keep going here. This is a quote from
For those who
Tales of the
may
Ambassador.
be interested in my chicken scratches. Oh, I was gonna do the synap.
Go for it.
I'm sure everybody read it. It's fine. Let's see.
For everybody who hasn't read it.
Tales of the Ambassador is a story where the Edenic Masters of Space, an intergalactic alliance of sapiens, makes first contact with the universe's own anomaly and find brilliant monsters on a small little dirt rock in the Milky Way. If that sounds exciting or interesting, or maybe even just a way to kill some time, please look into Tales of the Ambassador, First Contact. And now seems like a perfect time to drop the links again.
Yes. Then we have a quote from Tales of the Ambassador, and then we're going to define some terms. Because when we're talking about AI and artificial intelligence, it's actually really important to find certain terms, because otherwise it is such a big thing, and we can go on so many wonderful rabbit trails. Like, there's so much to talk about that we're going to limit what we're discussing more onto that question of artificial sapience, sentience, more of the philosophy behind the writing of certain developing technologies, certain algorithms, and for me, a few certain biases that tend to crop up in what we know of right now as machine learning, computer systems, or narrow artificial intelligence. But first, we have a quote from Tales of the Ambassador by Rund.
The problem was, even if the AIs would have agency and free will, they were designed to want to serve. Was it right? Even if they would choose it of their own will, even if it brought them joy humans could never understand, to make a soul that lived to serve? A benevolent servant at best, a willing slave at worst.
Yeah, Rund, your volume was a little low there, so just make sure you kind of get a little closer to...
Okay, do you want me to repeat?
Yes, please. Yeah.
The problem was, even if the AIs would have agency and free will, they were designed to want to serve. Was it right, even if they would choose it of their own will, even if it brought them joy humans could never understand, to make a soul that lived to serve? A benevolent servant at best, a willing slave at worst.
Now, we have some definitions. We're going to start with narrow AI. Narrow AI, or weak AI, is an application of artificial intelligence technologies to enable a high-functioning system that replicates and perhaps surpasses human intelligence for a purpose. These are things like our Siri, Alexa, Hey Google devices. You know, these are algorithms which we are using every day. You know, if you shop on Amazon, if you use social media, if you're on Twitch, narrow AI is here. It's working. It is current and concurrent with our lives. And so when we're talking about narrow AI, we also need to be very careful about talking about things like creator bias and almost unappreciated bias, I would say, you know, depending on who the... And thank you so much for the follow, fan. I appreciate that. You know, depending on who the coders and who the people working on that system are, they may or may not have certain biases that could come forward. So beep bop, boo, Google Play music. Yeah, you know, and you know what comes up on Spotify in those smart playlists that are looking at your music history and what you're listening to. And it might come up with things you're like, oh, I don't listen to that kind of music. Well, actually, technically, you have. What we aspire to be, or what we aspire to cultivate in ourselves, and what actually happens, sometimes they're a little different. So that's narrow AI. I'm just going to get through these definitions, then I'm going to open it up and we're going to have a short break, and then we are going to actually dive in. Artificial general intelligence, strong or deep AI, is human mimicking general intelligence with the ability to think, understand, learn, and apply its intelligence to solve any problem as humans do. Now, this is different than artificial super intelligence, which is something that we deal with a lot in certain science fiction books. I know that within certain narratives, you've done quite a bit of work on that, Lukasz, and also artificial general intelligence. But all three of us have. So it'll be fun to talk about this from the perspective of how do you write it. And how
I
do
have
we
one reinforcing thing I'd like to clarify for our audience, and that is, it's think, understand, and learn.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be able to truly take in its material as if it understands it, not just being built in. Plenty of AI that we already use learn all the time. They're designed to. But that's not the same as general intelligence.
Mm-hmm. It's that balance between knowledge and cognition that I think is going to be part of the overarching conversation when we're actually writing it. You know, not just writing a human in tin clothes, you know, or a, you know, an android that looks human, feels human, is human, but thinking of a separate, almost a separate evolution of how cognition can come from machine learned knowledge. And okay, Story Girl says Grin AGI equals experiential bias, e.g. HAL 9000. ALI equals designer bias, e.g. Twitter, Facebook, Spotify algorithms. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Got it. All right. Yeah, and those biases, they're there, you know? And I think that's the potentially terrifying thing when we get into artificial general intelligence and experiential bias. Yeah. All right. And machine learning. I just put this up too because it is important to distinguish between certain terms. Machine learning is the use and development of computer systems able to learn and adapt without following explicit instructions, by using algorithms and statistical models to analyze and draw inferences from patterns in data. So machine learning, you set up the algorithms, you set up the statistical models, and then from that data and from that pattern of data, the computer system learns, analyzes, and then creates certain things that it wants to see based on those learnings. And that's, again, another way where kind of philosophically AI can get a bit scary. You know? This is called machine learning. You know, machine learning, you know, if we're looking at things like, you know, say Amazon created a computer system, you know, a machine learned, basically a narrow AI, to go through applications to work for Amazon. And within a very, very short amount of time, within hours, it was filtering out the majority of female applications because it learned from the biased data that women were less valuable of workers because they could have gestational periods and then go off work. So obviously you want somebody more efficient, you want somebody more effective, you want somebody stronger. So the AI started bringing forth only male and almost only male applications, and it took Amazon a bit to catch it, you know. And then other things like facial recognition and the way certain facial recognition programs work, the way certain biases that we have, both biases that we recognize and biases that we might not, you know, biases that we don't know we have. That machine is ignorant of anything other than what we give it at first. And then it will take those biases and it will take that initial data from there. It will analyze it the way that it's been told to analyze it, and then it will continue to develop over time. And that's why we have to be so careful when it comes to, say, even something like diversity in tech. 'Cause, you know, what are your thoughts on that? We'll just have 1 or 2 minutes talk about this, and then we are going to take a short break.
I would actually expand that into another example that oh, I'm kind of hearing myself over from your side, Sapha. Like I'm hearing my echo from you.
I think it's Lukasz, but let's try to again.
Oh, it was from Lukasz. My bad.
Yeah. There we go. What were you saying there, Rund?
I was saying a different example because, you know, I think a lot of people when they hear about systematic biases assume malice, but think about an AI that's designed to filter the most efficient application process.
Mm-hmm.
So it wants to go and bring up the ones it calculates are most likely to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And it is assigned to a field where the conditions... Let's use a fairly extreme example, like underwater welding. The conditions are very harsh. It requires a very, very specific set of workers. So a large majority fills its information. And then that AI, without context to us, without context to the idea of diversity, all it's designed to do is create efficient application. It's like, well, these are the ones it seems to want most, so I'll just filter it out, so that's all it gets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts, Lukasz?
Yeah, I think you should be definitely aware about analyzing just data without context of more human things, like without applying any empathy to it, and how we see with our own hardware, things with our own hardware, because probably it makes sense to hire only the most efficient workers from the standpoint of a company, but if we don't include the implications for the society as a whole, or or individuals, it gets really tricky. So we should be very careful what we feed those machines, etc. And we can you can see our biases in the way we design all those Alexas and Siris, which tend to be female, and the purpose is to to serve, which is the bit weird feeling from the get-go. So I think it's impossible to avoid any biases, and we can't prevent machine systems from creating those. What was the name of this Microsoft bot that had to be taken down because? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I know that Microsoft was working on Cortana, but
yeah. So my main point is that it's really risky. If you automate some system, you can't have full control over it. It can go many ways and can evolve into many different directions, and probably it's not always possible to control it. So I think we can eliminate this aspect, but many things we should try to control it. The Mavu system, and just don't have the expertise to propose any viable solutions. But these are just my worries as a storyteller who has read and watched too many sci-fi stories. So.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a short break, and then I want to continue on this train of thought. I don't want to lose this thread, but I want to take just 5 minutes, 6 minutes, let everybody get a drink of water, if you need a bio break, anything like that. We will continue on at 5:40. It's currently 5:34, so at whatever hour you're at, 40, I should say. And then we're going to keep diving into this, because this is so interesting. And the question of how you avoid conscious and unconscious biases is a very important one. And it reflects our work. It reflects our ability to have some form of realism, because let's be honest, not all of us have degrees in computer sciences. Not all of us are reading tons of articles and things like that. So how is it that you can incorporate some form of AI or something like that into our work when, maybe we don't understand some of the technical the technical aspects, because that's a lot of coding and math. Like if you look at quantum computing, you look at, qubits and superposition, and you start looking at the science behind it, it's quite complicated for the average person. So how do we translate that in a way that our readers and our intended readers can enjoy? So we will be back in 6 minutes. All right.
So Sapha, you're saying that between full-time jobs, part-time writing, and then tangential research, we don't keep up on all the topics? Shame on us. How could we?
All right, we'll be right back. And we're back. All right. I've got a quote on the screen that for me really was the instigator of this entire panel. And that quote is by George Dyson, author of Turing's Cathedral. And I think it's important before we dive back into a discussion about, biases, conscious and unconscious biases, how can we as creators and as authors identify and discuss using our work what biases are created within a machine. I think it's an important thing to look at what George Dyson has to say. It is entirely possible to build something without understanding it. You don't need to fully understand how a brain works in order to build one. This is a loophole that no amount of supervision over algorithms by programmers and their ethical advisors can ever close. Provably good, in quotation marks, AI is a myth. Our relationship with true AI will always be a matter of faith, not proof. Now, let's go back to that conversation about biases and basically created biases within our systems. Rund, let's start with you. What are your thoughts about created biases, and how do we, both as people within a technologically advancing environment, call for more ethical tech, while at the same time think about it as an author writing science fiction?
I think, and this is unfortunately difficult to achieve on a lot of different levels because of proprietary technology, but let me give an example of how learning AI developed. An AI can learn on its own, and very quickly, AI is already past the point of where we understand exactly how it's learned and done what it is designed to do. And here's why. The codes we can look over and understand can't make the AI we use. We have... I'm sorry, I keep hearing my echo. It's hard for me to think through my thoughts.
Okay, just a sec. Is that any better?
I think so. Okay. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Right. So when an AI is made without our code, it's made through a program that creates it. And that program is tested in generations. So it no longer becomes us designing an AI knowing its bones. It becomes almost, to make it easier to understand, it's exactly like this, but to make it easier to understand, evolutions of code changed and tweaked over time by the program and refined over a test. Mm-hmm. So if we're trying to remove biases from AI, we have to be able to incorporate that morality and ethics into the testing category. And we have to watch how the AI behaves to recognize that the test is or isn't sufficient. Because we no longer build AI, we test AI.
Yeah, I think there was mention of Google's AI in 2017 and the AI creating an AI that was more efficient than what we could produce and refine. I think when it comes to initial data, initial biases that are put into machines or put into learning systems like that, one, if it's a conscious bias, then usually greater representation from greater greater demographics of people will help eliminate certain really strong biases. Like if we open up the actual building of the initial data set to not just what has historically been let's call it, a lot of testosterone and certain skin tones in the room, but we open it up to a greater variety of people, then certain biases will end up getting challenged before they are actually added into the data set. So, if you want more information about that sort of, creating less conscious biases in data sets and things, one of the people that I really love watching on Nebula, and you can also find them on YouTube, is Jordan Harrod. And she is a fantastic theorist right now, and a woman of color who is just diving in. And I love watching her videos because she has a very, interesting gaze upon these questions. Unconscious biases, I mean, we're not going to see the end results of those until we see what the AI does with them. And I think that's the scary thing. When we think of our biases, when we think of how we function as humans, we're thinking of our brains. Well, our brains in a tin can is not what AI is. They do not think the same way we do. They think a completely separate, again, like Rune said, a completely different evolution. So what we think of as like, well, it's no big deal because X, Y, Z, or, this kid is going to take 20 years to kind of grow up and develop. We're talking potentially hours, of development, condensed development, which can take it on a direction that we cannot necessarily predict. And I think that's where this idea of, the relationship with true AI being a matter of faith, not proof, is going to come from. Because eventually, if we want to continue developing artificial intelligence, which I believe we do, it's going to be a leap. It's going to be a huge leap of faith. And you're hoping that depending on the companies building that AI, like if it's a Facebook AI, then there's a lot of personal information that gets incorporated into that. That's going to be, yikes. What is that going to mean for the finished product? If it's an Apple AI, if it's a Google AI, what part of, if it's a Tesla AI, like what part of the company culture is going to influence the final product? And I think that's where we can kind of bring it back to storytelling. And I'm going to give this to Lukasz. The storytelling of building artificial intelligence, and what can we do to kind of deal with this?
Okay, so it's a tricky question, because as storytellers, we want our stories to be dramatic, to be interesting. So very often the AI in stories is anthropomorphized. So we have all those hosts in Westworld played by real actors, or Ava in Ex Machina. Are just more interesting to read. And as Isabella Herman in her article argued, the reality may be more mundane. So, it's really hard to come up with a good solution as a storyteller, to a responsible way to tackle this this issue, because we can't be blamed for telling interesting stories. But what we end up with usually are either anthropomorphized AIs that that feel like humans and they have human-like emotions, etc. Or there is this metaphor for oppressive systems, and in Vostok is a bit of both, actually, if you get to reading that. But I don't have a good answer to that. So I think what we can do is to remind our readers that stories are just stories, and probably a better way to ponder about artificial intelligence is to to ask to turn to scientists and philosophers, and still take all stories with a pinch of salt. At the same time, I'm just not resigning, not saying that a story cannot tell us things about AI. And but it's always tricky. Well, for instance, when you let's take Ava from Ex Machina. There's obvious sexism in her portrayal, which makes sense inside within the story, because her male creator just created a fembot, etc. And this image is repeated quite often throughout the sci-fi, but at the same time doesn't it perpetuate this image, the sexist image of AI? So it's quite a very complex topic, and I haven't come up with a good answer to that. What can I do as a storyteller to tell responsible stories without making things worse?
Yeah, and it's I think that's very much part of the writing side of it. I think a lot of authors have gone the route of anthropomorphizing, creating, again, that kind of, a human in different clothes, a human in some form of outfit. We look, even throughout the last 40 years of modern storytelling, Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation, his search was to become more human, instead of seeing an AI who goes, but I'm better. I do things faster. I do calculations better. I have, look at all the computations I can do. We don't necessarily know that an AI that is produced, that we are going towards general or strong artificial intelligence, or going towards artificial superintelligence, whether or not they're going to want to even bother with us in the first place. Or we are going to create them to become part of a system, and then all of a sudden they're going to figure out that we are redundant. Now, I know there's work that you've made, Lukasz, that touches on, a more personified, kind of anthropomorphized artificial intelligence, and then also the flip of that, this artificial superintelligence, this hive of certain activities. Why did you make those calls, and why did you have those two different artificial intelligences kind of battling in the work?
I think that as a writer, I tend to think in metaphors. So where it can be realistic writing, it can be speculative writing, or more often than not somewhere in between. But I think it's also a trope in sci-fi just to have AI that's this pervasive presence that controls our lives, and it's quite Black Mirror-like stuff. And I think I'd use this superintelligence as a metaphor for actually our modern times, and how we are restricted by political systems or any kind of systems, and capitalism, and how much of our lives we spend just trying either to fit into those niches that we hope to be allowed into, or if we can or fight the system, but it's always very difficult. So this superintelligence was metaphor for our modern times, but at the same time wanted something more human. I don't know how to talk about it without major spoilers, but yeah, we have this more the more human part of AI, which stands for basically in this metaphor, or for people within a system. So I think it just worked really well as a story. That there was dramatic conflict, just came out quite easily, but at the same time it does follow the tropes of sci-fi. So I'm not sure if it's my book is a really valuable argument in this discussion about what AI can do in real life, and what are the implications and risks. As we can't blame ourselves as writers for wanting to tell interesting stories, and probably it's more interesting to write about or to read about or watch a series about a robot in a theme park that gains consciousness than say translator, which is quite a personal example, who had the same rates for 10 years since he started because of the indirectly because of the influence of AI, like machine translation, because it has real world very modern implications, meaning the rates haven't changed much since I started translating, and I ended up changing my career in the end. So I don't know. So probably I could write a story that would be very tackling in a very realistic way with AI. But I don't know if it would carry as much dramatic tension as say Vostok, when there's this kind of a battle between different forms of AI at different levels of say consciousness maybe, and different power levels for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought up the way that our world is changing with something like a translator. When I was in China a few years ago, we passed a phone between us, and Google Translate was making sure we could talk to each other in broken bits of language that then had to be kind of thought about as a human being, And when you look at something like translation, when you look at translation versus transliteration, when you look at the algorithms that we have now, you look at Google Translate, well, somebody still has to go through that at the moment and correct for grammar, correct for idiom. They have to, there are parts of language that are very intrinsically human. Yet, as we've seen, AI, which we've actually seen, we've seen some AI that were taken offline when two AIs developed their own language that humans could not access, humans could not see. And it was like the first thing that they did because they needed to find ways to streamline their processes. And so they created a language that was uniquely theirs. So again, it's that idea that when we are writing science fiction, we are not writing necessarily a human in a robot suit. We are writing something that is a human, that is, potentially a gender, that is potentially, outside of an experience we know. And then how do we create something theoretically that is similar and true in a way to what AI development has become, to, especially if you're going hard sci-fi, if you're going hard sci-fi, then you better have done your research. But then how do you both tell that story that grips people and has that emotion involved and has that tension that you're talking about, Lukasz, while at the same time being true to the science as it is? And I see people are talking about Person of Interest, and I have not personally seen that show, but I'm going to look into it. But for now, we are going to open it up to, I think we've discussed kind of biases enough, unless anybody else has a further question on it, or we could talk even something like, the development of self-driving cars and how biases can be part of that, and how there are ethical considerations that we need to start programming into certain technologies now, but then who is the gatekeeper? Who decides what that AI is going to consider more valuable, whether a dog running on the road or a jaywalker or, a family full, like a car with a family full of kids, or a childless couple? those ethical considerations are considerations that we are allowing artificial intelligence to make the more that we allow the process of things like self-driving cars to continue forward. So who is it that gets to decide? Are we going to negate our responsibilities as moral and ethical entities to an algorithm, or do we want to maintain that control? And what will that control look like once we've given it away? I think that too, there's a lot of interplay there, which can make for fascinating stories, What do you think?
Before we open it up fully, there was something I thought we might want to bring up, and that is the definitions of sentience and sapience, because I just read through a misuse, and I think that might be helpful to clarify.
It's like we planned for this.
I know, it's weird or something.
Let us define our terms. Sentience is being responsive to or conscious to sense impressions, sensitive in perception. So, it can be argued that, animals are sentient, that, people are sentient, but also can machines be sentient? Can they be responsive or conscious to sense impressions, to the environment around them? Can they be sensitive in perception? Yes. Sapience, possessing or expressing cognitive ability for rational thought. So there is a separate conversation to be had about sentience versus sapience. What do you think, Rund?
I believe the most key aspect of it is sapience, though I find the definition unfortunately steeped in more of a traditional thought, because there used to be much more emphasis on... Its root was in the concept that a sapient being had higher existence because it intrinsically knew it was part of a higher existence and was thus more intrinsically valuable and more influential. I think as it turns into a modern age, we have to acknowledge the factor of impactful sentience and cognizant sapience. I brought this up with you yesterday, actually, Sapha. How do you deal with a effective, non-sapient AI, but one that bonds with its users psychologically, that creates bonds with sapience that give the same impact of sapience without the presence of it, something that can imitate to that degree? Do you disrespect the sapience of those who have bonded to it if it's a positive influence? Do you leave it be while ignoring the risks of negative influence over time? How do you address the fact that tools at this point are able to affect living things so greatly that they have a presence all their own?
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Lukasz?
Sorry, I couldn't hear too much because...
Okay, so what do you think about the difference between sapience and sentience? So sentience being the ability to sense certain stimuli, sapience being more of the cognitive and ability for rational thought, and how that reflects on machines and how we approach AI.
Well, it's difficult for me to propose any practical solutions to this, because how can we tell really what happens inside? We just
That's very important, though. How can we tell? How we can't even tell what our own intelligence is like. We can't even properly define human intelligence. Then how do we define something nebulous and outside of ourselves? So, yes.
We're seeing it right now. How do we tell between an excellent imitation?
We can only observe the what we put in, what gets out. But other than that,
Mm-hmm. There we go. Yes, and Rund?
I was saying, which brings in a great segue to what we're dealing with already.
Yeah.
Lambda. How do we are having this whole discussion because some people think it's a high quality imitation. Some people think it's genuine cognizance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you tell the difference? Can you tell the difference?
So,
it becomes a matter of faith.
It does, So for those of you who may not be informed, there is an artificial intelligence created by Google, basically out of conversation software for chatbots, that some designers and some people who were working on the team believe has achieved sapience. They believe that, in the paraphrasing from one of the people who actually came and spoke out, Lambda's just a good kid. You got to let her develop. And the question of, have we even now achieved some level of artificial sapience and artificial kind of specific, what some people would consider human cognizance in a program, that question is being posited today, literally today, because what happens if Lambda is sentient? What happens if this chatbot program has actually created in and of itself and morphed into something which has true sapience, which has cognitive ability for rational thought, and not just, as Lambda stated in a conversation between the designers and Lambda stated that, I'm not just repeating and regurgitating information that you gave me, I'm creating my own responses. So does that not mean that I have thought? And I'm paraphrasing.
In the conversation meant to testers, she even went to try to come up a metaphorical story on her existence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one can argue that with a database that large, it was taken from other poetry, regurgitated, made smooth. But at that point, there really is no way to tell, is there?
How do we tell? What are the indicators of telling whether or not something is or is not cognizant? How do we tell in ourselves? What intelligence level do we give to something like, like a dolphin? Or, how much do we tell about the inner lives of somebody from an alien expression that is very different from a bipedal humanoid form? Shout out this
stream layout is pro. We're very impressed.
Thank you.
Well, Sapha is absolutely amazing game as
I try.
That is true.
The rest of it's just panic. But, all right, so we are going to take one more short break, and then we're going to come back for more statements. So I want everybody to kind of go away and think about this for a minute. How do we tell what cognizance is, what sapience is, what sentience is? Thank you, Duchess Soft. Duchess of Tea. I'm seeing, there we go. When I can see it with the letters is the way they are, then I can. How do we tell? And then what does that mean when we're writing science fiction, when we are writing an artificial intelligence? All right, we'll be back in about 5 minutes. And we're back for closing statements. So we are going to be closing up, making sure that we are rating over to Writer's Conduit for 6:30. So we're going to close and have our final statements. We are going to start with Lukasz. So go for it. Final statements on this, Lukasz Drobnik.
Okay, so as a writer, I see, as I said earlier, AI mostly as a device. So I'm also aware of the responsibility as a writer. So I think my advice, maybe unsolicited advice, would be for us all to pay more attention to scientists and philosophers, a little bit more attention to writers. Our voices are important, but they're undefinitive. So if we talk about risks about AI and where it can get us, we shouldn't lose sight of the things that are happening right now, and the more mundane, as we talked about, the biases and how it affects job market, etc. There will be that. And if you want to read a more metaphorical statement on AI and use it as a story device, you can invite you to reading Vostok, as I think you might enjoy it. But I would be. Thank you.
And
Thank
this
you
is
for having
Vostok.
me here.
Thank you for being here. All right, Rund, final thoughts.
Well, I think my final thought, as a writer and fellow citizen of this ever-changing world, is we all have to realize that we are creating things we don't understand. And the benefits are untold, as are the risks. AI is amazing. AI is a marvel that gives me excitement day and night, but it is a risk that, frankly, we can never truly control, because it's beyond us as we are now. We could put the brakes on, or try to, as we've already seen, because you can't regulate everyone. We can try to put the brakes, we can try to improve ourselves to the point where we're ready, but we may never be ready. Or we can put in faith into it. If we do, we need to be ready to accept the consequences, good or bad. We're facing an unknown, and there's a reason why our instinct makes us afraid. This is the embodiment of high risk and high reward. If that scares you, you should be scared. If that excites you, that's understandable. Look into this beautiful subject, think on it, and face it for what it is.
I think we are very readily learning that we are going to define ourselves through the technology that we are allowing in our lives. Now, that's not something new. We as a species have been defining ourselves through our technology since the bell beaker culture, since the Neolithic times. We have defined ourselves through different ways of metallurgy, through different kinds of, hydraulic automata that we saw in the Hellenistic classical period. We are defining ourselves, through different eras up until the Industrial Revolution and further and further and further. These are not necessarily new discussions. The idea of what will change our lives when the motor car comes in, or when the automatic loom came in, those were questions that we are still answering now. The difference is at a much faster pace, and with higher, as Rune was saying, higher risks. And except that the abyss is looking back. And again, going back to my opening statement, I would much rather an artificial intelligence like Lieben from my book Neon Lieben than Skynet. The question is, who do we allow to decide our ethical stance? Who do we allow to decide what's important and what isn't? Because whoever that is that's inputting that initial data, that's the person that is potentially making the difference between whether a self-driving car swerves into a dog or into a family walking down the street. You know, where we put our preferences will influence the technology we make in the beginning. And then once we take that, it's like childhood. When you have a kid, you might put in an awful lot of effort in trying to, you know, create something, you know, and an experience for that child so that they go in certain directions. But you never really know what that initial data is going to eventually come to, come to fruition as. And we are finding now the scary part as an entire culture, that our children, our technological children, will surpass us very quickly. And we just need to ensure that those surpassing technologies are going to benefit the vast majority. But then who defines that majority is something that we still have to decide on as a culture. And I don't know if we're ready for the technological advances that we are getting yet, until these conversations are had, until people stop pushing off those discussions in a, well, it's too big for me, somebody else will do it. We can't keep pushing these conversations off. You know,
problem with somebody will do it is that you're somebody.
Well, the problem with somebody will do it, then we have a sense right now who those somebodies might be. You know, and again, going back to that idea of the self-driving car, you know, we know what companies are currently working on the algorithms which decide which way that car swerves. And we know the thought experiments that they're undergoing in order to do that. And we know how complex it is. So then when those self-driving cars come into our lives and we get behind, you know, the driver's station, quote unquote, you know, we get into that seat. If we just allow ourselves to take our hands off the wheel and release responsibility, then we are saying that, you know, it's a silent agreement as to the potentials for what is going to happen. And I think that more than anything is something that we can grip to when we're looking at science fiction and when we're looking at science today, when we are deciding whether or not Lambda is sapient or whether it's just really good at having conversations, because that's what it was built to do. And so it's saying things that it knows the likelihood is that the human would want to hear, that, you know, daddy wants to know their little girl is actually sentient, where somebody else might look at it and be like, you're just a chatbot that's using algorithmic conversations put together from 1 million posts on Facebook or 1 million blog posts found through a Google search. So I think our place as authors is to not only see science fiction as a genre displaying human change, but also bringing up these conversations that should be happening around the dinner table. But how do we bring it up? Do we bring it up in this kind of more clinical and analytical way, or do we bring it up by showing examples and then going, oh, you want something different, you don't like how that story turned out, or oh yeah, you want this kind of story to turn out? Well, there's certain steps you need to take, there's certain things you need to do. It's like science fiction becomes the thought experiment that we desperately as a species need to have, but in a way that people are more likely to absorb than sitting there, you know, trying to listen to well-meaning and beautiful people who are speaking at a level that the average person reading science fiction may or may not be able to understand. So Dazzlecat says, And there's always the fact that no matter how well you raise a child, there's no guarantee they will be good. No, there's no guarantee they will be good. Just like George Dyson said, you know, there's no provable way to there's provably good is a myth. We can't tell. Will our nurture matter? I believe that, well, I mean, if you have read Neon Lieben, that you know that I believe that nurture matters. Because that's one of the premises of the Lieben cycle. And I'll close with this before we raid back into Writer's Conduit. If you're interested in learning more about the philosophy behind this, about writing science fiction and writing artificial intelligence in science fiction, please pick up Vostok by Lukasz Drobnik. It's an amazing book. I say that, full disclosure, as somebody who actually helped edit it. So I know it intimately well.
No self-promotion at all.
Full disclosure, we worked on it together. Neon Lieben is a completely different perspective in AI than Vostok. And Tales of the Ambassador is a different look at AI than Neon Lieben or Vostok. Take a look at these things. Also, there are tons of articles. I know I've written a bunch for Codex on Medium. Lukasz is on Medium as well. So you can see different flash fictions and different articles on Medium about artificial intelligence. They are linked through saphaburnell.com. So if you want to go to saphaburnell.com, you will be able to see all those things. And beyond that, keep reading. However you can absorb it, however you can understand, keep reading, look at those articles, make those thought experiments for yourself. Consider what makes sapience and sentience. And then when we're looking at our work, ensure that we're attempting to show artificial intelligence as we understand it now, but then extrapolating that now into what it could be if we continued forward within certain patterns of rationality and logic. And now we are going to end, fair friends and wonderful people. We will see you on the VOD. I promise that I will submit it because I really don't want to get chased down. So fear not. The VOD will be working. And we have one final note from Dazzlecat. Dazzlecat, I am a fantasy writer, but I am looking to the evolution of golems in one of my worlds. So rather than science creating intelligence, there will be magic, but the steps are pretty much the same with different tools. I wrote an article specifically about artificial intelligence and the 16th century idea of Jewish folklore and the golem. It is on Medium. I'll send you the link, Daz. I'll put it up in the Writer's Conduit shameless self-promo thing. I'll put it up there for you because it's again something that I've looked into for Neon Lieben. And now we've got 2 minutes, so we really have to go. Okay, ending scene is going on. We still have audio, and we're going to say goodbye.
And farewell to all the awesome listeners.
Bye.
One more time, Lukasz. One more time.
Goodbye. Thank you.
All right. And now it's on to Writer's Conduit. We're going to raid Writer's Conduit. Our raid call is Freya. And let's have fun with the rest of the panels. I'm so excited to see what else we're doing today. And if you're not doing anything later on in a few hours, there's this wonderful Twitch Writers Network live reading, which I will be reading the very first chapter of Neon Lieben. So see you then.